I'm Angela Drummond Matthews. Welcome to Week 1 of American Literature 1. In this class, you'll learn about the literature of the United States of America from the beginnings to around 1865. Why is it important to study American literature? When we read about the experiences of others, it helps us understand others and how we relate to them. But when we read American literature, we get insight into the way our culture has developed and grown. We learn about the struggles of the people who came before us. We learn how they saw the world and how they interpreted its problems. Have you ever been learning about American history and wondered, what were they thinking? Reading literature tells us. It tells us what the people who came before us thought about their world and what they hoped for the future. It helps us understand the ideas that made our culture the way it is and explains why we believe some of the things we do. Finally, reading literature helps us understand our past so that we can contextualize our present and prepare for the future. So I hope you enjoy and are enriched by the readings I've chosen for this semester. Unit 1 is called Folklore, Myth, and Religion. So we'll be looking at the religious writings and folklore of the people that made up early America. Wait a minute. Do you know the difference between myth and religion? My myths are a religion, but your religion is a myth. That's right. When we believe in something or we consider it valid to be believed in, we call it a religion. When we don't believe in it or consider it valid to be believed in, we call it a myth. So when we look at Native American myths, we're examining a religion that is still followed by many people today. Multiple religions, actually. When we look at Christian writings, we are looking at the mythology of the Middle East that made its way to Western Europe and other regions and then to the Americas. We're going to start with some of the earliest kinds of literature, the kind that wasn't even originally written down. Before people had writing, they passed along their ideas and traditions orally. They told the stories that contained their history and religion and even humorous lessons. First, we'll look at Native American stories. Prior to colonization, there were over 500 tribes living freely in what we call North America and speaking hundreds of languages and having very diverse beliefs. Some were hunter-gatherers, while other tribes had agricultural economies and complex legal and political systems. Still, they didn't use a written language. Their history, records, and culture were passed to one another through memorization. The stories we will read are from the different tribal traditions. They exemplify the varied styles of the native cultures and their ideas. Next, we'll read stories from the oral traditions of the African Americans. During the early years of America, Africans were kidnapped by European traders to be taken to the Americas as slaves. Many people also like to point out that some Africans sold their own people to European traders as well. While this is true, slavery in the Americas was a very different system. In Africa, slaves may have been people working off a debt or a sentence for a crime. They could also have been prisoners of war. Most slaves in Africa had the opportunity to end their period of servitude. But in America and other slaveholding European colonies, slavery became a permanent and persistent state. Eventually, slavery became tied to race, establishing black people as a permanent underclass, a designation which did not end when slavery was over. We're going to look at some of the folk tales these slaves told as part of their oral tradition. These stories were brought with them from Africa, but over the generations changed to reflect the life in the plantations of the South. Most slaves were forbidden to learn to read and write, but through sharing of stories, African Americans were able to keep some parts of their culture alive. We'll close out the week with stories from Hispanic and Latinx oral traditions. Spain sent colonizers to the Americas, starting with Columbus and continuing for a few centuries. They brought disease, maltreatment, slavery, and death to their colonies in the New World. But they also brought their culture. As you can see here, Spain colonized large swaths of the Americas from the south to the central regions to Mexico and North America. They had no problem mixing with the indigenous people they had colonized. And this mixture of people and traditions gave us the Hispanic/Latinx culture we know today. Some of the oral tales of this tradition began as stories from Spain, but through repeated telling were influenced by the lives and experiences of Hispanics and Latinxes of the Americas. I hope you enjoy our first readings. Many students are intimidated when they get a lot of reading. Remember to plan your study time according to how quickly or slowly you read. Find a quiet place to read, and it never hurts to take notes while you do. Be sure that you think about how the stories relate to the communities from which they came. Also, think about what commonalities the stories have and where they diverge. Finally, think about how you relate to the stories. What do they remind you of in your own life? What do you already know that you can compare to what you've read? You'll have discussion questions related to the readings this week. You may have a reading quiz. You will also do a group discussion of the week's readings. I'll split the class into groups, and then you'll contact your group members and set up a time to meet. Please be sure that your email address as listed in the Blackboard directory is correct. If it is not, it will be up to you to make sure your group members know your actual email address and are able to communicate with you. That's all for now. Like I said, I hope you enjoy the readings. Remember, you can email me at any time if you have a question. Have a great week. Bye-bye.